Now that you've left Alcoholics Anonymous or 12 step, you are likely hyper aware of baloney everywhere. Maybe you are looking for a way to navigate all the baloney, all the bullshittery, and to think more critically. If that is you, you're going to love today's episode, which is all about the AA Deprogrammer's Baloney Kit. This is inspired by Carl Sagan's book, The Demon Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Dark, where he talks about the Baloney Kit, and we're going to adapt it for 12 steps so that you can become a better critical thinker, not only in your deprogramming and deconstruction journey, but also in life. These are the skills that keep on skilling. Does that even make sense? Hello and welcome to Sobriety Bestie Podcast. I'm Kirsten and I'm super excited that you are here today for this great episode to further develop our critical thinking skills. Okay, so yes, this is adapted from Carl Sagan's book for people who are escaping 12-step ideology, wanting to get it out of their minds. When we leave AA, we're not just leaving a meeting, obviously. We're leaving a worldview, an identity, nervous system regulation for a lot of us, purpose. So there's a lot that we are leaving when we're inside Alcoholics Anonymous, or at least this was the case for me. The ideology becomes like an operating system, how we think, how we feel, how we judge, how we see everything, what we believe about ourselves, about our disease, or what we believe about recovery, addiction, and the world at large. And like the community, the us against them, the so-called alcoholics versus the normies. So we're going to go through the baloney detection kit. Yes, this is the AA Deprogrammer's baloney detection kit right here for you. This is to help us rebuild the part of our brain that we outsourced to AA ideology. That's literally part of the indoctrination. So number 1, independent confirmation. Now, let me know in the comments if you read this book. If you've read any other critical thinking book that you recommend, you can feel free to drop that below. But we're literally just going through Carl Sagan's book here on the baloney detection kit, which is pretty famous in the critical thinking world. Starts on page 210 of his book. And the first one is independent confirmation. Don't trust the stories simply because a room of people repeat it. So it's really helpful in our baloney detection to ask, where is independent evidence outside of Alcoholics Anonymous that these things exist? Where is there, if there is any, evidence that alcoholism, and I do alcoholism in air quotes because in the US, alcoholism does not exist. It's called alcohol use disorder. I'm not sure what country you're in and if alcoholism is an actual diagnosis. But so in AA, part of the baloney is alcoholism is a spiritual disease. Is there anywhere outside of Alcoholics Anonymous that seems to be true? And what do they say about it? And is there any data that show that? Another thing inside of AA is that powerlessness is required for recovery, that you need to admit that you're powerless so that you can recover. AA is the only way. Relapse is inevitable without meetings. If you go to meetings, then that is somehow equated with not only your sobriety, but also your survival, you being alive, essentially. Then they also say, rarely have we seen. Is that actually true? Rarely have we seen. So what does rarely mean? And how would that sentence be true? And what are the data showing about the success rates or failure rates of Alcoholics Anonymous? A lot of different sources, when we look through them, depending upon where you look, right? Place Alcoholics Anonymous at a 5 to 10% success rate. So that would be a 90 to 95% failure rate. So the line, rarely have we seen a person fail who has thoroughly followed our path. The failure rate's 90 to 95%. So independent confirmation is a vibe here. In AA, the vibe is kind of like, if enough people are repeating it, eventually we believe it. People are parroting things, and then we hear that, and it seems like there's a lot of people saying it, so then we start to believe it, then we start to say it, so then we're indoctrinating the newcomers. The reality is if you can't confirm it outside of the closed system, might only be true, and we use true lightly here, inside the system. That was a big cracker for me on AA ideology. I was like, where else in the world is real alcoholic actually a thing? And I was like, oh, it only is true using true lightly inside the system of Alcoholics Anonymous. All right. Number 2 in Carl Sagan's Baloney detection kit, and we're doing the AA Deprogrammers version, is encourage debate. So an AA debate is essentially equated with ego, your disease talking, resentment. It's dangerous. When in reality, a healthy mind invites disagreement. In fact, that's how we can grow, by listening to people that we don't agree with and then thinking it through. Do I want to integrate any of what they said? Does any of what they said make sense? Do I want to look at all the data and come to a new conclusion? So when I think about critical thinking for me, I think of it as yes, looking at different sources of data, seeing what makes sense, seeing what the research says, the science says, or whatever. And then also maintaining an open mind to new information if it's relevant. So not all new information would be relevant, but to analyze it and to take it in and consider, and to be open to changing perspectives with new information and integrating that, or I would call it evolving intellectually. And here's some interesting things to think about Alcoholics Anonymous. Why can they not tolerate critical questioning? Why, if you heard, like I heard, no outside literature, why would they say no outside literature? Why are critics demonized? Why is criticism not allowed? We know that safe groups welcome all criticism, all feedback, including criticism. In fact, they encourage it because they want to continue to grow and evolve and be safe and be an effective group. When I think about groups, I think of safe groups, high control groups, and cults, right? It's kind of like a spectrum, right? And in my mind, I think of it as a spectrum based upon control. That's just how I've simplified it for myself. So depending on how much control is in the group, it goes from being safe, all the way up to cults. So cults for sure would not want you to read anything that doesn't agree with the cult outside literature. They would not welcome dissent or critical thinking or criticism at all. Another question to ask about AA is, why is disagreement pathologized? Literally when you're new in there and you say, well, what about this or this? And you're questioning things, people will say, not the rule, but individual experience can show that this might happen, right? I know that I saw it happening. That's your disease talking, take the cotton out of your ears, put it in your mouth. All these different sayings and thought-stopping cliches to essentially say you're new, sit up and shut up. Sit down, and sit up and shut up. Basically, don't talk. I think it was suit up and show up. Yeah. So what is that about? Any ideology that only survives when criticism is silenced, that's not a group that cares about truth. That's a group that cares about control. All right. Number 3 in Carl Sagan's Baloney detection kit, AA deprogramming version here. Authority means nothing without evidence. So in this one, specifically in Carl Sagan's book, he says, arguments from authority carry little weight. Authorities have made mistakes in the past. They will do it again in the future. Perhaps a better way to say it is that in science, there are no authorities. At most, there are experts. So the AA version is Bill Wilson said it, or my sponsor said it, or the one that is so iconic for AA members. It's in the book. That's not in the book. That's in the book. What about what's in the book? The program's in the book. Or I got 32 years, kid. I notice this a lot of the times in my comments on the internet is that people who are steppers essentially, or people who are inside the AA ideology, they'll start off their comment with, I have 32 years sober in AA. I have 37 years, 40 years, 20 years, 15 years, whatever it is, right? Or 8 years. So they'll start off with this, the reason why I'm the authority in their mind is their sober time. And then it's as if because they've equated their sobriety time which is alleged, because I don't even know these people, right? You could be lying about it. Although let's say maybe they're not even, give them the benefit of the doubt here. Just because you have 32 years sober doesn't mean that what follows out of your mouth is true. That's not how science works. And yeah, I'm 32 years sober and here's how it is. It's like, yeah. So none of that equals evidence. Sobriety time doesn't equal evidence to what then they understand about addiction. That doesn't mean that they're then all of a sudden a recovery expert, an addiction expert, a psychology expert. And even if they do have a psychology degree, because I'll get people saying, I have a psychology degree, and so therefore this. And I'm like, bro, like literally, I have a psychology degree too, and that's not relevant, like what you and I did in school. This is like a fact that can be like debated. Like, is it true or not? Like we don't, or what does the current science show or indicate or support on this hypothesis or whatever. And whether or not we read books and took tests and studied and completed a degree in psychology is irrelevant to whether or not this thing we're talking about is actually has legs or not. Basically, in AA, seniority often replaces truth. Experience does not equal universal truth, obviously. But this is definitely like a baloney thing that we see. So the person with 30 years might simply have white-knuckled it. They might have switched addictions. They might have stayed in AA because they were terrified to leave. It doesn't mean that they understand the concept that is being talked about or the idea or the theory. So let's say we're talking about the disease idea or the disease theory of addiction. So just because you have 30 years in Alcoholics Anonymous doesn't mean that you know that the disease theory is a fact. I mean, you might know that in your brain, right? But it doesn't mean that it is a fact. And often I would even say somebody who's been spending their entire time inside one ideology does not have the bird's eye view or the enlightened, if you will, view where you can you've illuminated past what you were trained and you could see what the other people think and think critically about it all and look into outside literature or other sources to find out what makes sense to you. So bottom line is longevity is not proof. Degrees are not proof. I had another guy yesterday. He's like, well, I'm a scientist, so I know how it is, essentially. I mean, he started off, I'm a scientist, so. And I was just like, this authority thing, like most of us, and let me know what you think in the comments below, but I feel like most of us, after after leaving AA, like we've been traumatized through authority, a lot of us. The whole sponsor dynamic or higher power dynamic or the big book dynamic or the group of drunks dynamic. And a lot of us aren't too excited, especially initially, at surrendering our agency or our autonomy to something else. We're like, no, bro, we're trying to get that back. So this one guy said, I'm a scientist. And then basically continued his comment in a way that was like, therefore I know the best and here's the truth. And he was sharing his opinion though. So then I was like, okay, so if we're pulling rank, I'm a statistician, which is like my background. And I'm like, and the data don't show that. Like, what do you mean? I'm like, if you have a study that validates what you're saying, there's evidence for what you're saying, feel free to link it below, bro. And of course, they generally never come back because there aren't really those studies. I really think that when you're really in the ideology deep and you really believe it, then you can kind of do these little mental gymnastics. This isn't just me guessing what's going on, where you think it's true and that maybe there must be something that indicates it because you know that it's reality and you've seen the miracle happen and you've seen people get sober, whatever. But they can't actually come back with reality and cite their sources. All right, number 4 in the Baloney detection kit, AA Deprogramming Edition, is multiple hypotheses. So the AA version is it only offers one explanation. You drank because you are powerless, diseased, defective, spiritually broken. Period. You have, remember, it's a threefold disease, right? You drank because you have a threefold disease. The big part of it is that you are spiritually bankrupt. You have a spiritual malady. That is the core of your problem. I don't believe any of this anymore. This is all baloney in my view. So you have a spiritual malady, and because of that, it's going to kick off this mental obsession where you have this preoccupation with the drink. And then once you pick up the drink, now you have a physical allergy. So it's spiritual, mental, and physical. And because you have that first drink, then you have the phenomenon of craving, and you can't, and then you're going to keep drinking and you're going to end up dead, essentially. And so all of that, I don't believe any of that anymore. When real life, what might actually be happening is that we have trauma. There's something in our environment. Maybe it is how our coping pattern. Maybe there are some genetics. Maybe there's some culture. It's obviously a habit. Maybe opportunity plays into that, or pain, or unprocessed pain. So there's a lot of things that could play into that, not to mention diagnoses that we have for mental health or personality things or neurodivergence or unrecognized, like maybe we haven't even had that part of our mental health or our neurology understood for ourselves. So there's a lot of other reasons why we might be drinking the way that we are or drinking the way that we were. But AA basically teaches there's one thing, you're an alcoholic. And then there's one solution, which is Bill's 12 steps to a higher power. A doorknob of your understanding, basically the religion, the steps to God. Critical thinking asks different questions. Critical thinking says, what else could be true? And then it tests those alternatives. So when I found out about ADHD and I started looking into it more, I found out that it depends again on what studies you look at, right? But if you have ADHD, then you are about 6 times more likely to develop an alcohol use disorder than somebody who doesn't have it. That makes sense to me because of my understanding of what is like a dopamine deficit. So the brain is seeking, and this is loosely my understanding of it, seeking more dopamine than a typical brain or a non-ADHD brain. And one of the ways that we can get that dopamine brain need met is through drinking alcohol. So we're more likely to develop an alcohol use disorder. For me, that's helpful to know that it's not a spiritual malady. It's not a physical allergy. It's not a mental obsession. It's actually, I've been assessed as ADHD. And so my brain is actually doing a little bit of a dopamine different thing than some of the other brains. And so I take care of my dopamine needs in a healthy, positive way. One thing I like to do is I like to make videos. I like to learn all the things. I like to read all the books. And I like to share it all with you. So I'm getting dopamine up here. I'm also drinking a coffee. Cheers. How you doing today? Good morning, good evening. Clearly I'm getting a little dopamine, can you tell? So my point is that when I look at other things about what might be going on with me specifically, like my mental health, my coping skills or lack thereof, my neurodivergence, my diagnoses, my situation, my nervous system dysregulation, whatever it is that I might be walking or medicating or pouring alcohol over, whatever the alcohol is like solving for me, that would be what's going out. It's not a spiritual malady. In fact, I mean, maybe in religions in general, they might get on board with the idea that drinking is a spiritual malady or sin or whatever. In AA religion, it's a spiritual malady. I don't think outside of AA, well, maybe some groups that are still AA spinoffs, right? Let me know in the comments what you think. But I think most scientific-based modalities or paths, recovery paths, aren't talking about a spiritual malady, that we're not spiritually sick. There's other things. I don't know. The dopamine thing makes a lot more sense to me. And also gives me like an idea of how to orient myself so that I can be like moving forward and evolving with my life. So if I orient myself on purpose, for example, I'm going to have a very different life than if I organize my dopamine needs or get my dopamine needs met through alcohol or something destructive. So be constructive versus destructive. That's a lot more helpful for me to understand. All right, number five, he talks about don't marry your own ideas. So try not to get overly, I'm reading from his book now. Try not to get overly attached to the hypothesis just because it's yours. It's only a way station in the pursuit of knowledge. Ask yourself why you like the idea, compare it fairly with the alternatives, see if you can find reasons for rejecting it. If you don't, others will. AA essentially trains us to defend the ideology as if it is us, like that it's personal to us. Like if you are saying anything bad about AA, it's about my identity, that's about my purpose, that's about my community, that's about my salvation, that's about my survival. So it can go very deep into us. Like for me, as a true believer, as a former true believer, right? I was in AA for 10 years and I left in 2020. So as a former, like as an AA true believer, if somebody was saying something like AA is not the way, or the disease thing is only a theory, the disease model is only a model, right? I would get triggered and it did feel threatening in my body. Now, I don't tend towards trolling, so I wouldn't go out and tell somebody tell somebody off about it. And no shame in the game if that's what I'm more like, I wanna learn about it and make a video about it. That's kind of my style. But I would feel in my nervous system that it was a threat. That I would feel physically the fight or flight threat response happening in my body because it's my identity, it's my survival, it's my community. It's like everything that's important to me is all based on AA is true. So if someone's saying some part of it or all of it is not true, that felt like a threat inside my body. So if AA is wrong, our identity collapses. Anybody have an identity collapse after they left AA? That was me. Yeah, they call it like exit costs or exit trauma when you leave a cult. And so, yeah, one of the major things for a lot of us is like, who am I without the I'm an alcoholic identity? So I no longer identify as an alcoholic. I actually don't even think it's actually a thing at all, period. I also am not in recovery anymore. I don't use or believe in a lot of the recovery terms. I've deconstructed from a lot of them, things like sober time, relapse, whatever. I do believe in recovery, and I believe it's a temporary process. I don't believe in forever recovery. We don't do forevery around here. Well, do whatever you want. I don't do forevery. I do recovery, and I did it, and I'm done. So a good question to ask as you're detecting baloney is, do I believe this thing, whatever it is, from the AA ideology or beyond? Do I believe it because it's true, or because believing it once saved me or protected me in some way? What is actually true? For me, leaving AA required grieving what I once believed that I needed to believe in order to simply live. That's why a lot of this work can go deep for many of us, and why I think we're incredibly courageous, why I think you're incredibly courageous for doing this work, for leaving. It can be incredibly difficult. Society still thinks we're bananas for leaving or for talking about it, when really I think that we're the sane ones and society hasn't caught up yet. Let me know what you think below. All right, 6 is quantify. So quantify, reading from Carl Sagan's book again. If whatever it is that you're explaining has some measure, some numerical quantity attached to it, you'll be much better able to discriminate among competing hypotheses. What is vague and qualitative is open to many explanations. Of course, there are truths to be sought in many qualitative issues we are obligated to confront, but finding them is more challenging. When we think about it, AA avoids numbers like the plague. The only numbers AA really likes is millions saved. Millions saved. And the reason likely that AA doesn't like numbers, doesn't do stats, doesn't know their failure rate, and why AA members don't know the failure rate and don't look for it, aside from the outside literature thing, is because it breaks the spell. It's a delusion. It's like a shared delusion that AA works. AA is the way it works if you work it, all those things. It's like a shared delusion. Any ideology that we jump into that isn't based on a reality, that's based upon ideas that aren't validated or verified or scientifically relevant or modern even. Remember, like, there is no science that went into AA. And it's interesting because I've said that on the internet before. There's like literally, it was not started with any science. It was started with a doctor's opinion, which was Dr. Silkworth's opinion. And Dr. Silkworth's opinion was the mental obsession and the physical allergy. Those were opinions from 91 years ago. Bill's idea was spiritual malady because he needed to tie his so-called recovery program, which is really just a religion. It's not recovery, it's religion, or it's religion masquerading as recovery. He needed to tie his 12 steps, which are religious steps, to getting sober. So in order for you to get the bait and switch, right? Because you get there, you want to get sober, but they got to bait and switch you to the religious steps. So he says you have a spiritual malady. That's the tie over, because if he can make you believe, if you can believe through the indoctrination that you have a spiritual malady and that's your core problem, then the solution of a spiritual awakening as a result of having done the steps, having a spiritual experience, right? Then he can sell you on his steps. It's a sales tactic. He has to create a problem that bridges you from where you are, which is drinking problem, to his solution, which is religious steps. So spiritual malady was Bill's idea. No science there. And people will say, oh, but there's science that community is great and has benefits for it, and community is great for recovery, for addiction recovery. And it's like, okay, community is great for addiction recovery, but are cults? Because there's community outside of AA. Like, okay, so maybe you join a yoga community or a non-harmful recovery community or a hiking community or a book club or something. You can still get the benefits of community, which of course there's benefits of community, without it being a harmful community, a coercive control community. So yeah, it's a lot to unpack, isn't it? Here are things that you can ask yourself about AA when you're doing your baloney detection. Number one, what are the actual success rates? What I found is it's 5 to 10%, depending upon where you look. But have a little look-see, let me know. And if you have an answer, let me know in the comments. Of course, I don't know all the things. A lot of people watching this, maybe including you, have done more research on this than me. So let's make this be a conversation in the comments. That's always the invitation. How many people leave AA and are fine? That's another thing that is never looked at. That's another number that's never addressed. So if only about 5% of the people, more or less, that go to AA stay and have any sort of results there, that means 95% of the people don't. That means most of the people, even though rarely have we seen, most of the people leave AA. So how many of the people leave AA and are totally fine, either because they bounce initially or because they bounce later? So I would be in the bounce later category because I left in 2020, got there in 2009, left in 2020. So I bounced after 10 and a half years. I'm doing fine. I'm doing better than ever. A lot of us do better than ever after leaving AA. Not everybody, because it's all individual. We have different things going on, different mental health, different trauma, different support, different resources, different access levels, all those things, different abilities, capabilities, communities, whatever. And so, yeah, how many people leave and are totally fine? That is something that is never reported. In fact, you have the confirmation bias inside Alcoholics Anonymous, where the only people when you're in 12-step that you hear from who leave are who? The ones who come back and tell you how bad it was out there. I thought I can go out there and I'd be fine. I wasn't. I was going insane. I was drinking. I was this. It was disaster. So the only people who come back, confirmation bias, selection bias, the only people who come back are the ones who it didn't work for, right? The ones of us who leave and are great, we don't go back to tell them we're great. Well, I think most of us don't. Although a few of the people who watch this Sobriety Bestie Vibes have commented below, I'm going to go back into the meeting and tell them how great I am after leaving the meeting. So some people do go back and report that. I never once heard that. I never heard an escapee come back and talk about how they left AA and life is better and they just wanted to share the good news that you can leave and be fine. So yeah, there is a real, if all you hear is that when you leave, it's horrible, or so-and-so left and is dead, so-and-so left is arrested, or I went out and I came back and it was terrible. So then you start to believe that because that's your entire world. That becomes like propaganda. It becomes the narrative because we're not looking at how many people leave and are doing fine. Then how many people get worse? That's also something that's never, at least in my experience, addressed inside Alcoholics Anonymous or 12-step. How many people go to AA and get worse, or NA, or any of the 12-step groups? I have talked to people on my podcast or in the DMs who went to AA or 12-step and progressively got a lot worse. I would say that's my story too, although I wouldn't say that it was necessarily my mental health that got worse. It was my confidence, it was my self-esteem, it was my decision making that was slowly getting atrophied over time because I was outsourcing a lot of my decisions to my higher power, sponsor, the ideology, the group, the book, the group think. And so because I was abdicating or because I was, yeah, being obedient to something outside of myself, because I was turning my will and my life and my thoughts over to an ideology, that was disabling me more and more and more over time. And then, you turn the plane that's flying in the sky, if it just turns 1 degree, let's say the plane's in Los Angeles and it's flying towards New York, but you turn that plane 1 degree at the beginning of the journey, it's not gonna make it to New York. It's gonna end up in, I don't know, more towards South America or Canada, right? It's no longer going that same direction. So I feel like that's what AA did for me. It was disabling in my decision making. It was disabling in my self-esteem, in my, yeah, my go-getterness, really, for a lack of a better way to say it. But for a lot of people, it's in their mental health and their will to live. And that's where it gets really fucked up, doesn't it? So AA never asked the question, how many people come here and get worse? You can't even talk about that, can you? What about, ah, this one's hard. What about how many people are told to get off medication and don't make it? How many people are told to not get help, outside help, professional help, and don't make it? There's so many stats inside Alcoholics Anonymous that nobody dares even think about, but I'd say are super relevant if we're going to have a whole picture understanding of what's actually going on. When we start counting these real outcomes, that's when the mythology cracks wide open and we can see clearly the effectiveness, or I'd say ineffectiveness and harmfulness and deadliness of the ideology. I mean, these are stats that I would love to know. Are there any stats that I didn't mention there that you think would be relevant to, like if you were going to design a study and there was numbers that you wanted to know that would help paint a picture about what's actually happening inside the rooms? Let us know in the comments what that would be. Number 7 is every link must hold. Let's read about this. This is from Carl Sagan's book. Again, if there's a chain of argument, every link in the chain must work, including the premise, not just most of them. Okay, so AA's worldview collapses if any of their primary claims fail. Like alcoholism has to be a thing for AA to work. Alcoholism has to exist, which I don't think it does. It must be a disease. I don't agree with that either. And it's obviously totally fine if you think that alcoholism exists and it is a disease, because we're just waking up to critical thinking here. It's about thinking for ourselves. And then powerlessness has to be required. That was actually my gateway drug, my gateway belief to crack me out of AA ideology was like, oh wait, the powerlessness thing is mythology. And since I've dug into the science, I really unpacked how the powerlessness is bullshit. It doesn't mean I was always able to control my drinking, but there's other reasons other than I'm powerless and need a higher power therefore and able to live. So the powerlessness is required in AA ideology for it to work. The surrender must be required. It must work. We have to surrender. God must intervene. What is those 3 things, the 3 pertinent ideas where God could and would if we, what was that? A, B, and C. And it ends with God could and would if he were sought. So AA has a lot of assumptions built into it, which are not used outside of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'd say through modern science can easily be debunked. Yeah. So when we break one link, and this is for the baloney detection, right? The powerlessness, the disease model, that the big book is accurate or divinely inspired, that it's a spiritual necessity. We need to have a higher power in order to survive, that we need a daily reprieve, that we need to proselytize, evangelize, and recruit via the 12th step, via sponsorship, via carrying the message, doing hospitals and institutions, speaking in meetings, speaking on social media. Even if we are defending AA in the comments, we are essentially evangelizing and recruiting for Alcoholics Anonymous. This is all part of the ideology, is that we have to free labor through recruitment, evangelizing, proselytizing, all of that for eternity in order to be able to simply live. Y'all know I don't believe in the forever recovery model. I believe recovery is temporary. Now, you might choose that you want to be like in recovery forever, and that's totally valid. Whatever you choose for you is totally valid. My only point is we should be able to choose. We get to choose. And then looking at the facts and using like the baloney detection kit can help us choose better for ourselves. And when questioning is forbidden in general, run, run. That is not safe. It's not a safe group when you're not allowed to question or criticize practices that are shady or questionable, or if you have a question at all. Yeah, safe groups let you question. All right, number 8 in the baloney detection kit, or the AA Deprogrammers baloney detection kit, is Occam's razor. This convenient rule of thumb, reading from the book, this convenient rule of thumb urges us when we're faced with two hypotheses that explain the data equally well to choose the simpler. Okay, so an easier way to say this is the simple answer is probably true. That's generally what it means. So instead of you relapse because your ego sabotaged your spiritual growth and you didn't turn your will and your life over to your higher power, you weren't rigorously honest, you didn't do all of your amends, your alcoholic thinking self will run riot turned over. I get a little sick even saying that. Maybe the simple answer is you drank because you were in emotional pain. You drank because you have a habit and your brain was doing that habit, that pattern of drinking. Your brain already learned that that's how you get reinforced, and your drinking became like a need. I've seen a lot of science say this, that it becomes like a need, like air, water, food. Drinking can become a need in our brain, right? Until we rewire our brain and change our brains. Maybe we drank because we're suffering, period. Not because of spiritual malady, not because of a daily reprieve that we didn't get our daily reprieve on, not because we weren't sponsoring somebody or of service enough, not because we didn't turn it over or surrender enough, not because we didn't listen to what our sponsor said about how to live our life. Maybe we're just feeling some emotional discomfort, so we drank. So simpler explanations are often more realistic or accurate than complex mystical ones. 9 in the baloney detection kit is falsifiability. So always reading again, always ask whether the hypothesis can be, at least in principle, falsified. Propositions that are untestable, unfalsifiable are not worth much. Consider the grand idea that our universe and everything in it is just an elementary particle, an electron, say, in a much bigger cosmos. But if we can never acquire information from outside our universe, is not the idea incapable of disproof? You must be able to check assertions. The truths must be testable. Beliefs are not testable. So if you drink again, AA was right. That's not like testable. If you don't drink again, it's because you accessed God through Alcoholics Anonymous. Again, not testable. If you leave AA, here's the classic one. It's called a no true Scotsman fallacy. If you leave AA and do well, you were never a real alcoholic. So any proof, any evidence of success outside the system, the only way that can make sense in a closed system is to invalidate, to remove the validation from that success. So if you're in AA, they'll tell you you're a real alcoholic. And if you don't say you're a real alcoholic, then you're in denial. So then you're like, okay, fine, I'm a real alcoholic. Eventually you get conditioned, or I got indoctrinated into that baloney. And then when I leave, now they're like, you were never a real alcoholic. I'm like, bro, y'all coerced me so intensely to identify as a real alcoholic. And then when I leave, you're like, you were never a real alcoholic. I'm like, nobody is a real alcoholic. It's literally a cult religion, and that's the identity trap. And it's hardcore coercive control manipulation. It literally doesn't exist outside of the system. Namaste. Yeah, the bottom line is a lot of what is going on inside Alcoholics Anonymous is not science, like at all. It's faith. It is a faith program. It is a religion. So there you have it. That was the Baloney detection kit, adapted for the AA Deprogrammer, deprogramming from AA Baloney, from the Demon Haunted World, Carl Sagan. Let me know what you thought about this in the comments. Did anything come up for you? Did this ring any bells? This was our book of the month for December in the Deprogram book club. You are invited to join the Deprogram book club. It is one of the Zooms we have every month inside the Deprogram Lounge, which is my free community for deprogrammers from Alcoholics Anonymous or any 12-step program. So I will link below the Deprogram Lounge. The book club's in there. I also have like a list of deprogramming books. This is under our critical thinking book list. So I'll put my list of books that I recommend to help free your mind, get liberated from 12-step. And yeah, so I can't wait to hear from you in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.